Hello and welcome everybody to the very exciting book launch of Dr. Elhadd's latest second volume of his amazing history of medicine in the Sudan. I don't think this has been attempted, certainly not in English. It may have been in Arabic, I don't know. But I've read the first volume and we reviewed it in Sudan Studies. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Charlotte Martin. I'm the editor of Sudan Studies, which is the journal of the Society for the Study of the Sudan's UK. So we cover and look at every issue that is of interest to our members in South Sudan and Sudan. The Society has been going for a long time. Professor Peter Woodward, who is going to be the facilitator at this session, was one of the founding members. I've only been a member for about 20 years and I've been editor of the journal for 10. It's not an academic journal. It's to serve members and also to give a reflection of interests and issues in both countries. And without further ado, I'd like to thank everybody for organising this event and all those who are attending online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And I would like again to commend the efforts of support by Sudan's Study Society UK. I would like to thank Francis Gotto, and I would like to thank as well Professor Peter Woodward, who has kindly actually agreed to facilitate this session. I will hand over to Professor Peter Woodward just to give his introduction, and then after him I will start talking about the book launch. Here we are, Peter.
Thank you, Tarik. Apologies for my delay. I don't get on very well with modern technology. I also apologize for not being able to be with you, but the uncertainties of the trains are so bad at the moment. I had a friend stuck on the station for 3 hours last weekend, and I never got there if I'd been stuck like that. So it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about the context of this book, both my personal connections to the context and the broader one as well. We must give our thanks to, as I'm sure Charlotte may have done already, to SOAS for the cooperation they've shown the Society over many years. Now, I've long been a fan of the medical profession in Sudan. I was once the chairman of the Gordon College Memorial College Trust Fund for many years, which of course was a body which raised the original money for the university, which the medical faculty is such a central and excellent part of its work. When I've been visiting Sudan for many years now, I've always made a point of going to the medical faculty, and on some occasions the Gordon Trust has been able to help the faculty in various ways, including, I think, some of the first computers, but we didn't have Zoom back in my time on the trust. I've enjoyed the many connections that I've had with Sudan doctors I've known, and I've been very impressed to find that 2 of them crop up in your book, Tarik. One is Dr. Jesus Iskander. He's the son of Daoud Iskander, who you mentioned and give a short biography. And when I first arrived in Kosti to teach English in Kosti Boys Secondary School, he was the main physician in the town and kept a good eye on me and helped me in many ways. So that was the start of my good relationship with Sudan doctors. And the second one, and perhaps much better known, Dr. Ali Bedri, Dr. Ali Bedri was the first Sudanese Minister of Health, as you mentioned, and you've got mention of both him, Ali Bedri, and Dawda Skanda in your Appendix 1. I've always been impressed, particularly with the work of all the Bedri family, and the way in which Afad has operated as a university, which I visited several times, where too they have a medical school enabling the education of women in particular, and their part in education. Now, of course, we know the ups and downs since independence of the medical faculty's position within the country. And I've been amazed how well the faculty has survived through the various fluctuations of fortunes that Sudan has experienced since 1956. Also, of course, many Sudanese doctors have gone on to become international contributors to the profession on a worldwide basis. It's understandable that this situation has arisen partly because of the excellence of the university itself and its works, but also because of the situation in which doctors have had to operate, particularly since 1989, with the exclusions of people for personal reasons, very often from their professional work, with the lack of facilities and support to medicine across the country. So it's understandable that, in a sense, the loss of Sudan in terms of its own system has been produced advantages to the international community, not least here in the UK. There are many Sudanese doctors serving here in UK, and we've been very thankful for the work they've done, including, I should say, the grandson of Dr. Dawda Skanda, who's been working in Birmingham for many years. And we all grieved at the deaths suffered by Sudanese doctors here during COVID. And they were amongst the first doctors to give their lives, basically, to trying to serve Britain in this terrible time. Now, let me turn away from the context, as I've seen it, to Tarik himself and the work that he's produced. I'm in awe of you, Tarik, frankly. You seem to have lived two lives in one man for all your life. A very successful medical practitioner, also a man who's become an outstanding contributor to the history of medicine, who's become a historian as well. And most of us don't manage as much as in one life as you've done. Having done two lives as physician and historian, that is an outstanding role. I know you've written many books, but I'm struck at looking at the start of the present book we're talking about today, that it says this is part 5 of your open magnum opus, part of a comprehensive mega project, and I can well believe it, the scale in which you've worked and the amount of publications that you produced, including, of course, the ones that Charlotte referred to in her introduction. So we're all in debt to you, and we know that far more is to come. But we also know that we can't escape the new tragedy that Sudan has faced since in the start of this century, 21st century. Indeed, as you say in the new book, services in Sudan sadly have crumbled completely into an array of ragged services. Later you refer to them as frizzled out in the conditions they're in. And this was, of course, written before the present crisis in the country. Your hope then was for revival as a result of the popular revolution of 2018. Alas, worse than that, of course, we've had the crisis into which the country has been plunged during the course of this year, and the long conflict that goes on there now. Initially, when the conflict began, there was world attention and some world support. But now, combination with the passage of time, which always tends to limit the appetite for stories of journalists, along with the alternative story of Palestine, which is so much in the headlines now, but we're not even in a position where there's much attention being paid by the international community to the terrible situation, so much worse even than it was in 2018 when the revolution began to start. In 1955, a British journalist who was covering the steps towards independence wrote a book under the title of "When God Made Sudan, He Laughed." He doesn't laugh now. None of us laugh. Instead, in fact, we're all weeping now. And the hope of restoration seems so far away. So over to you, Tarik. More from you on the book itself and on the comments and discussion that I'm sure will take place now. Thank you very much for the invitation to introduce you tonight.
Thank you very much, Professor Woodward. And thank you very much for very kind words. And thank you again for being with us, despite the difficulty of the technology and the difficulty of coming here. And I would like again just to thank SSUK, especially Francis and Charlotte Martin for their support. And I would like to welcome you all, the audience here in the theater. And I would like to thank people who have joined actually, through the virtual platform. It gives me great pleasure actually just to give you a bit of account of my other passion in life, apart from my usual medical practice. I have been blessed actually to have a very strong passion for history. And this has very much helped me actually to try to make my contribution to the history of medicine in the Sudan. And would like just to point to the fact that, there were initial sort of publications that come to the fore as early as 1985 by Paul Square, who was very much actually an eyewitness for the beginning as well as the development of the modern actually medical practice in the Sudan, established at the turn of the 20th century by the British. Following Paul Square, whose only book, the sort of history of Sudan Medical Service and enterprise in social medicine, which was published actually in the year I was born in 1958. Following his landmark book, which was just like a sort of a personal memoir, because he followed actually the progression of the medical practice as well as the creation of the modern medical platform for nearly 50 years. And his book was published in 1958. In the 1970s, the late Professor Ahmed Bayoumi also made his contribution by an excellent book, but it has a special actually focus on public health. Following that, there were actually several publications that covered part of the story. And when I started my passion actually as a teen of the 21st century, there has been real gaps actually in the overall picture as being pointed out to the reviewer of Paul Square, is that the whole story is still actually to come out from some source. And I felt a passion as well as a desire and a duty to try to bridge this gap. There were other publications that looked actually into the traditional Sudanese medicine by the renowned Professor Ahmed Al-Safi, who has actually published a very eminent book back in the early 80s. And there are actually several versions. It is a real actually Magnus sort of contribution. He also made his contribution in an encyclopedic way to the reader regarding the medical history of Sudan, and he is a prototype in that sort of things. Other publications actually come to the fore, one of them coming from Professor Sadiq Ibrahim Khalil, who is one of our teachers. He also made a contribution by publishing a book in 2018. And Patrick Darcy, the founder and the first dean of the School of Pharmacy, published a famous book actually about the history of the Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory. There were some other actually books that dealt with certain themes, including the book by Professor Ahmed Adil, who actually wrote the contribution of the pharmaceutical tycoon Henry Solomon Wellcome, and this book actually came to the fore in 2021. And Professor Amin has also published a book called أطباء السودان الحفاة, which has been actually published in 2008. There were some books that dealt with biographies as well as autobiographies. And I think it is important to talk to you about my latest book, which is the second volume. The title is The Evolution of Modern Medicine in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, that covered the period from 1924 to 1956. And before going there, I would like just to give you an account of the first volume entitled Colonialism and the Medical Experience in the Sudan, that covered actually the history of medicine from the era of the Fun Kingdom of Sinnar in 1504, and then it will actually end in year 1924. And I will come to this very briefly. What I have actually, this is the cover design of the second volume, which has just been published actually a few months ago. And I think we have a bit of, yeah, this is the cover design of the first volume, Colonialism and the Medical Experiences. And this is the cover design of the second volume, The Evolution of Modern Medicine, that actually, you know, come back to back with the first volume. And I will just give you a sort of a short account of each one of these. Before going to that, I have actually also got myself to translate several actually works that looked into the history of medicine. And the first book I actually translated is Itchy Feet, A Tale of a Doctor by Alexander Cruikshank, who was one of the first doctors actually who came at the time when the School of Medicine, Kitchener School of Medicine was created. I have another actually translated book, which is Sudan Doctor, which was actually, you know, again, it is an autobiography written by another sort of Sudani, another British doctor. The third book I have actually translated was the famous epic of Patrick Darcy, Laboratory on the Nile, The History of Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory. So I have subsequently actually translated two other works which have actually also, you know, looked into the life and times, as well as it does have actually major part in terms of the development and progression and evolution actually of modern medicine in Sudan. All this work actually, they are rare books. They are published by British doctors who has worked in Sudan, and their actually passion has fallen actually on the heel of my personal volume. The last book I have managed to actually translate came actually to the fore early this year. It was Poison in a Small Measure, Dr. Christopherson and the Cure for Bilharzia. It was actually written by a very eminent freelance writer, the late Anne Crichton Harris. She is a sort of a British Canadian, and I was blessed actually to have quite good connection with her till the time of her demise. So Anne Crichton Harris wrote this book, and the translation actually give you the sort of feel of, again, the development as well as the evolution of medicine in the Sudan. So I will give you a sort of an account about the first volume, because actually the two volumes are complementary. The initial volume, the Colonialism and the Medical Experience in Sudan, actually came in October 2020 when the Sudan revolution actually was as its climax. I will just give you a sort of a general sort of account of the first volume, and then before we can actually go into the second volume. I would like just to mention that, you know, I was blessed by having actually a very splendid and very kind man, my father, who actually responsible for me actually aiming to achieve the maximum. So I have dedicated my work actually to my late father. And I would like here to acknowledge the great contribution of many people who actually give me a helping hands, and including actually Professor Ali Khojali, who actually sadly passed away early this year. Professor Ali Khojali is the first actually professor of physiology. He's a graduate of Kitchener School of Medicine, batch 1953, and he went on actually to be the first basic science professor, and he was an architect of a very actually eminent sort of basic medical sciences department, both in terms of physiology as well as in biochemistry. And so again, I'm indebted to Professor Heather Sharkey, who actually wrote the foreword for my first book. And I just give you slight feel of the first volume, which begins with a prologue. And the interesting thing, when I started actually to write this book, I was taking my youngest son, Amr, in a town market of Ayr in Scotland to see his friends. And I was quite actually fascinated to see the signpost for the street saying Dongla Road. And it just happened to be around the same time when I started actually my project, hence the title for my introductory part, from Dongla Exhibition to Dongla Road. We know that Dongla Exhibition was the first actually landmark sort of battle that actually shaped the modern history of Sudan, when the forces of the Mahdi were defeated by the British, and this actually paved the way. So it is just all a sort of a parallel as well as something to remember. So you will find actually in Britain, as well as even in the New World, which has been actually, you know, ruled by the British Empire, like US and like Australia and New Zealand, you will find actually names of some Sudanese towns. And as a matter of interest, Professor Peter Woodward, who was born in London, the house he was born in London, it is called Adbara Road. And Adbara, as we know, is a famous battle between the forces of the Ansar as well as the invading British troops. The introduction takes me into the first part, and the first part of the first volume actually deals with the historical background, primarily actually the sort of an idea about what is Sudan. This is for non-Sudanese, of course, readers. And the second sort of chapter of that first part deals with the actually political relationship between Sudan, as old as it was, and United Kingdom. And that actually began in the late 18th century, when some actually consuls started to explore what is meant by Sudan. So the Sudan actually came into the backyard of the British only around the time when the quest actually to discover the source of the River Nile very much actually put the Sudan in the backyard of the British colonial enterprise. So the political relationship between Sudan, of course, has been between Sudan and Britain, has been very much actually taken in the context in that part. And following this, actually, we all know about, you know, what happened around that time when Gordon became actually the governor of Sudan on behalf of the British, on behalf of the Turco-Egyptian rule. And then the dramatic finale actually very much sets the scene for the further events that to come actually at the end of the 19th century, when the forces led by Lord Kitchener actually came to Sudan. And then we know that the creation of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan very much actually shaped the history of modern Sudan, including the medical actually field. Part 2 of the first volume actually looks into the history of medicine in Sudan from the time of the era of the Fon Kingdom of Sinnar up to the time when the Battle of Omdurman actually took place. And this will take us actually as early times when, during the Fon Kingdom of Sinnar, the first actually British explorer, James Bruce, who's a Scots laird in all the Scots means lord. He came actually to Sudan around 1772, and the first actually writing about the Sudanese hinterlands actually came into his volume, and he wrote quite a big actually epics in terms of journals. And this is very much actually brought again Sudan into the backyard of the so James Bruce, as a matter of interest, actually got himself into the persona of being a physician. He wasn't a physician, but travelers and explorers actually, many of them actually, they took the persona of being physician in order to gain access as well as to have an easy port. Following James Bruce, actually 2 further British explorers. One of them is called William George Brown, who came actually to Darfur, and he wrote an epic book. And a lot of traditional Sudanese actually medical practices has been featured in the writing of William George Brown, as well as in his successor, the famous Anglo-Swiss genius, Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who wrote, Travels Through Nubia. And again, in that actually book, you will read very much about what sort of enterprises. So the first actually real foots of modern medicine actually happened when Muhammad Ali took actually the power in Egypt, and the French physician Antoine Claude Bey actually helped him to establish the first medical school in Abu Zabal, which later on became Al-Qasr Al-Aini Medical School. That was in 1827. And many graduates actually of that school came and worked in Sudan, and they have set actually the platform for what used to be the latest actually version of medical practices in the world around that time. So Sudan was very much blessed around that time to have actually some physician who graduated from there. However, following the crumbling of the Turco-Egyptian rule, and when the Mahdi actually reigned supreme, unfortunately, the era of the Mahdiya did not witness actually further progression of medical practices. In actual fact, it was a setback for medical practices for mainly political reasons, as well as a long spell of nearly 1.5 decades of instability. Following this, we know that, when the British came, they started actually to found platform for medicine, for modern medicine. And this was very much actually, the task of the military physicians. The British Army doctors who were known as the Royal Army Medical Corps actually were the first people who actually come to the providing the modern medical services. And in the backyard of this, the first civilian medical department was established in 1904, nearly 6 years after the invasion by Lord Kitchener. And The service was very much actually small to begin with, and it was actually relying on a handful of British doctors. However, the main bulk of the medical force actually were recruited from the former Greater Syria, and actually they were graduates from two medical schools in Beirut. One of them is called the University St. Joseph, which was established by the Jesuit medical mission in Beirut, that came following the initial Syrian Protestant College was established by the American Presbyterian mission in 1867, and the French one was actually led by the Catholic. However, the graduates of these two schools, they were actually recruited because they both speak English as well as Arabic, and they were actually the main backbone of the health services, in addition to the few military British doctors. So I love to say the forgotten pioneers, Egyptian and Syrian, because unfortunately the legacy of those people have not been actually documented, and hopefully somebody will come one day and get them from such unforgotten sort of platform. The annual health reports, which was written by directors of the medical service, do provide quite excellent sort of repository for people who would like to look more into the fine details, which I have managed to document some of these. However, the civilian medical department took its turns because it was small, it was rudimentary, it was dominated by military doctor. However, it took a sort of a revive when in 1922, the small Sudan Medical Department became Sudan Medical Service. And the guy who took it into new frontiers was the godfather of creation of Kitchener Medical School, Dr. Oliver Francis Aitke. And so the book will take you into beginnings into special also enterprises like Omdurman Midwifery Training School. One would like just to point to the fact that, midwifery training was very much superseded the training of nurses in the Sudan. And that was a very landmark enterprise where traditional midwives called dayas, they were taken, retrained, and then they were sent to help their people. And that was quite fascinating enterprise. This picture shows you the old staff of the first Sudan Medical Department. This is Dr. John Brian Christopherson, whom is one of his descendants, Anne Crichton Harris. He was her great uncle. She wrote his biography. He was the first director of Sudan Medical Department. And this is Dr. Hassan Afandi Zaki, who was a sort of a veteran of 3 eras. He worked during the last 10, 15 years of the Turco-Egyptian rule, and he was also a private physician for Charles Gordon. And then he was captured after the Mahdiya revolution reigned supreme, and he was taken as a private physician for the Mahdi, and then following that for the Khalifa Abdullah Ta'ashi. And even he survived the Mahdi's rule, and he rejoined Sudan Medical Department as a physician when the British came and the creation of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan took place. This picture is also very landmark. It shows the two eminent ladies who established the first training of the Sudanese traditional midwives, and they created Omdurman Midwifery Training School. It was a landmark enterprise. And you could see this is the pioneers of the staff of that school, including several women. This lady is called Batul Muhammad Isa. She went on to be a very prominent teacher. And I think she taught your father, Nur Abdul Majid, very likely, yes, because she survived till the sort of early 60s. So Part 4 actually of the first volume covers the history of the Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory. One would like to mention that the famous tycoon, Henry Solomon Wellcome, had only around 5 laboratories. 4 of them were in the British Isles. The only overseas actually laboratory was in the Sudan, and it was known as the Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory in Khartoum. And that was actually an enterprise second to none, because it did not only actually indulge in research in medicine, but actually it set the platform for research and scientific endeavors actually in a broader context, including agriculture, including mineral, including waters. And then unfortunately, the laboratory did not survive except for around 4 decades or so. And as a matter of interest, some actually personality clash actually prevented Henry Solomon Wellcome from building actually a larger and a bigger laboratory actually on the Nile, simply because he had some actually prejudice from some of the British administration during the rule of Sir Robert Symes, or Sir James Symes. So unfortunately that sort of laboratory became part of what came later as a Stack Medical Laboratory, which has been built in 1927 as a sort of a tributary of the Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory, but later on it became actually so this sort of laboratory made very vast contribution to medical research as well as to medical service, including, public health enterprises as well as medical education. And it set the scene actually for so many areas, including, entomology, including, as I mentioned, water and mineral. Not only that, also it set the foundation for the modern anthropology in the Sudan, where one of the famous actual anthropologists, Sir Seligman, came with his wife, Brenda Seligman, to Sudan, and they actually studied the anthropology of the indigenous population of the South. So, so this book, this volume will conclude with the history of Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory, which has actually encompassed so many areas, including even actually setting training actually for Sudanese doctors. And around that time, they have sent projects akin to our modern continuous medical education actually in that sense. This is a picture of Sir Andrew Balfour, who was a very eminent public physician as well as a genius researcher. He was the first director of Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory, and he actually took the post of the first actually director of the public health services in Khartoum, and he set the platform for modern public health services. This is a picture of Henry Solomon Wellcome sitting in the middle. Those are the staff of Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory. You could see that this is Sir Andrew Balfour, and this is the famous Sir James Curry, the first actually director of education in Sudan. And he was actually the sort of principal or the dean of Gordon Memorial College. And you could see that there are some Sudanese employees who were assistant in that lab. So one of the genius enterprises was actually the floating laboratory called the QLIX, and the floating research laboratory helped actually research to be conducted actually in remote parts of the world of the Sudan, down in the south as well as in the far southwest of the Sudan and southeast of Sudan. This is a picture of some actually employees cleaning the sanitary sort of packets, which used to be very much actually the tradition. The book has actually other sort of appendices, and I think because of time, I will not go into details of that. So the first appendix deals with Dr. John Brian Christopherson, and this is Dr. John Brian Christopherson, and those are the first two modern nurses actually who worked in the Khartoum Civil Hospital. Khartoum Civil Hospital, مستشفى الخرطوم القديمة, was actually built 1909, and you could see here some of the staff, including some physicians from Egypt as well as from Syria. This is the title of the second sort of appendix, and the third appendix actually covers a non-medical actual enterprise of Henry Wellcome, who also had a very sort of strong passion actually for archaeology, and indeed actually in a very clever way he chose a site near the city of Sinnar, where it's called Jebel Moya, where he made actually some excavation, and that actually led to discovery of some very rare archaeological actually findings, which continued actually to produce results even into the 21st century by his Appendix 4 covers the traditional Sudanese medical practices, and the last actually part covers 3 eminent British physicians actually who made their contribution actually to science, either in Sudan or in Britain when they came back. One of them is called actually Stephen Lyle Cummins, who was the first person who did very landmark actually research about immunity of tuberculosis when he was working in the River Hospital in Khartoum. And he came up with a theory which actually dominated the field of tuberculosis immunity for several decades. And he went on to be the first professor of tuberculosis in Wales College of Medicine in Cardiff. And he established a diploma, which was very much actually being renowned for nearly half a century of actually graduating doctors who looks after control as well as treatment of tuberculosis. Many of them actually were Sudanese. I was chatting with Professor actually Bakr Usman Saeed about this yesterday. So this is the cover design of the second volume. The title is The Evolution of Modern Medicine in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. The first volume actually has got 4 parts, and it finished actually when the second volume begins in 1924, when the Kitchener School of Medicine actually was established. I've been very blessed actually by people who have helped and support that work, including Professor Peter Woodward, who wrote actually a blurb, as well as Professor Ahmed Al-Safi, who's now sadly actually staying in the US after having to leave Sudan following this terrible disaster. Also, again, very grateful to Professor Heza Sharkey, who had actually strong passion to the history of medicine as well as of my work. This is the second time she actually come off her way and supporting my actually endeavors. So I would like just to say thank you to her as well as thank you to others. This second volume is dedicated to what I love to call the cascade of wonderful girls in my life. I'm being very blessed actually by having so many females in my life who shaped my life, including my mother, Nafisa, my wife, Sarah Al-Arabi, my only daughter, Shaza, and my late sister who passed away at a young age, Awatif, as well as to 2 very eminent Scottish physicians, Gil Belch in Scotland, who was my mentor during my research there, and Fiona Green, who was actually my mate in research, as well as my actually companion following some of my medical work. I would like also to mention my handful, actually grand daughters, Sarah Junior, Malak, Molly, Princess Aya, and Rosie. Rosie was actually in tears last night when I have to leave to come to London. And then Anne Sitter Hisan, whom I would love to see, as well as the list goes on actually, because there are wonderful many aunt and actually member of the family, as well as people who have helped me. So I have a special passion towards those women. God bless them all. So I'm really very acknowledged. I'm acknowledging I have to apologize because the system here, I have to flick. You can see here the names of the people I have just mentioned. And I am also acknowledging great support by many people, including actually, some of the audience. Charlotte Martin has helped, Francis Gotto has helped in the this second volume as well as in the previous volume. And I would like also to pay tribute to many people actually who actually supported my work by guiding me into references as well as. The second volume comes in 6 parts. It will conclude a sort of a 10 parts of the whole work. It kicks off by the Sudan Medical Service, which actually was the successor of Sudan Medical Department. Then part 6 cover Kitchener School of Medicine, and then the training of doctors as well as the other healthcare professionals come in part 7. Part 8 actually covers an area hitherto untouched about the role of the Christian mission societies in the health services. Part 9 looks into medical research and the creation of the first Sudan Ministry of Health, the first actually sort of minister ever in the history of Sudan during the Anglo-Egyptian was Dr. Ali Badri, who was mentioned earlier by Professor Peter Woodward. The last part cover actually some aspects of epidemics as well as endemic diseases. And there are actually some appendices, and I will come to that. So would like to pay tribute to Professor Robert Kramer, who has written the foreword for this volume, and like to say thank you to him. And the second volume begin with a prelude. And as a matter of interest, I have put a famous quote by John F.E. Bloss, who was a very actually eminent physician of the Sudan Medical Service. He made great contribution actually to research, especially in tropical medicine. And I just actually have this extract. He could not understand why there was all this fuss about a country which is either miles and miles of sands or miles and miles of swamps. He was quoting an American around that time. So it was just referring to my beloved country. Hopefully we will have our home country back after all these calamities. This picture of Dr. Abdul Halim Mohammed, he's the first Sudanese physician. He's an icon of modern Sudanese medicine, and he was mentor actually of teacher of many of us. And I was blessed actually by being examined by him in my final MBBS in 1983. This picture is very actually eminent. You can see this is the late Queen Elizabeth II. This photo was taken during her 1965 famous visit to Khartoum. And around that time, 2 eminent physicians, this is Professor Tarik Elhadd, who was a polymath, he was a genius, and behind her is Dr. Halim. Both of them actually at that time were members of the Sudan ruling Supreme Council. Tarik Elhadd was a polymath. He was a genius. He had many enterprises, and some of his enterprises actually he went and he actually unraveled the codes of the old Egyptian language, the hieroglyphics. And this is some of his actually translation of the hieroglyphics, actually, relics as well as the old. And he wrote many books, and he was the first actually psychiatrist to be trained from Africa. And he established actually the footsteps of modern psychiatry medicine. So part 5, as I mentioned, covers Sudan Medical Service. And the Sudan Medical Service used to be quite actually eminent, and it was known around the 1930s and 1940s as the best in the world. And this is actually a quote taken by a very eminent British doctor who worked in the Sudan in 1940s, and he wrote a very interesting article. I found it in the retired fellows, Dr. Kenneth Owen. Kenneth Owen worked as a general doctor in Sudan, and then he came back and he rejoined St. Mary's, and he went actually to be one of the people who have actually masterminded of modern transplant, renal transplant services. I had the pleasure actually of meeting him in person. He was about his 90, and sadly he actually passed away in 2013. So the modern medical services actually encompass both actually public health endeavor as well as, you know, curative medicine. And the part 5 covers actually all these sort of details. And I think I would like just to mention that the structure of the health service was actually very prototype, because there were 3 levels of hospitals. Class A, which like in our modern day tertiary hospitals, and then Class B, which like sort of general district hospitals, and Class C, which like actually community small sort of hospitals. And these 3 actually are very much interconnected. Class A hospitals used to be in the main provincial actually headquarters and capitals, and Class B are linked with them, and they do have facilities which are not available in Class C hospitals. And by the time when the British actually left Sudan, there were around 50 hospitals of these classes. And as I mentioned, you know, the bulk of the medical personnel actually were from the Levant. They were Syrian and Lebanese, very few Egyptians. And this also involved actually the allied healthcare professionals. And by the time the Kitchener School of Medicine was actually established, the graduates of this school started actually to replace the Syrian doctors. And by the by the Second World War, there has been no actually Syrian doctors, because their job were taken by the Sudanese doctors. So this part chapter 4 covers the staff and human resources. And for researchers, they get actually details about this sort of staff development. And I would like just to, because of sake of time, would like just to show you this very interesting sort of footage. This is the Khartoum Civil Hospital, which is known as مستشفى الخرطوم القديمة. It was the first modern hospital after the Anglo-Egyptian actually era began. It was built in 1905. This photo was taken by the first director, John Brian Christopherson, around 1912. And here, just I would like to take the opportunity to thank the staff of Sudan Archives in Durham by helping with this. And you could see that this the bottom sort of photograph is for Port Sudan Hospital, when the picture was taken around the circa of 1920s. This is a job offer, and it is courtesy of Michael Morris. Michael Morris actually is a son of one of the eminent surgeons who was the senior surgeon in Sudan, called Mr. Tom Morris. He was Australian-British. This is, again, a sort of a photo of the license to practice medicine. And it belongs to the first, actually, Sudanese ophthalmologist, Dr. Hussein Ahmed Hussein, who is actually grandfather of our friend and colleague, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Fahal, who works now actually in Romford. So part 6 covers the footage of Kitchener School of Medicine, how it was established, and the chapter or the part begins actually with giving an idea about, you know, what I call the antecedent of medicine in the Sudan, Gordon Memorial College. And we know that Kitchener School of Medicine was planned to be part of the Gordon Memorial College, which was the first ever modern school, which became actually the platform for the future University of Khartoum. And this part actually covers the sort of the earliest developments, as well as the evolution of Gordon Memorial College, and that actually materialized in establishment of what is known as the University College Khartoum in September 1951, when actually Kitchener School of Medicine, which was established in 1924, merged with Gordon Memorial College to be Khartoum, University College Khartoum, which was actually part of University of London around that time. And that actually sets the scene for University of Khartoum actually to come to the fore several years later. So the part actually covers the development and evolution of the Kitchener School of Medicine. And I won't go into details. You will find a lot of details, of course, in the book. And I would like just to mention that the intake was very small. The number were around 10. And the plan for actually the school when it was established is that it should actually give around 6 doctors to the health service, to help in the health service in Sudan. And this tradition actually continued from the 1920 till the early 1950s when the number started actually to shoot. And one of the graduates actually of the late batches of Kitchener School of Medicine was Dr. Nur Abdul Majid, again, the father of our audience. So thank you very much for attending. And the part actually covers everything, including the teaching and academic staff. And it covers the courses and curriculum and syllabuses. And it covers actually, examination and assessment. So, and also it looks into the administrative hierarchy and the school council. Some of these traditions actually persisted into our modern era. So, there are other aspects of the school, including the famous prizes and the graphic museum, which was a landmark actually enterprise that helped with sort of history of medicine as well as medical education in its very much actually early beginning around that time. And of course, the Baghdadi Trust has very much helped. And the part actually covers the evolution of Kitchener School of Medicine. And there is actually a sort of a list of the fairest registrars. This sort of picture is quite interesting because the top one is the Gordon Memorial College around 1929. And this is one of the fairest footage actually of the famous dome of Kitchener School of Medicine, which used to be actually the southern boundary of the old Khartoum during the Anglo-Egyptian. This is the photo again of the late Professor Ali Khodili, the fairest professor of physiology. This picture in the bottom is the fairest batch of graduates. You could see here Dr. Ali Badri, who was the fairest actually Minister of Health in the history of Sudan. He was appointed in 1948. And this is Dr. Muhammad Amin al-Said, another member of the fairest batch. Professor Peter Woodward referred to the son and grandson of Dr. Dawood Iskandar, the fairest actually gynecologist in the history of Sudan. Dawood Iskandar actually is from a famous Coptic family in Umdurman, and he was actually among the fairest 7 graduates of Kitchener School of Medicine. This picture was taken in 1928 when they graduated. And this picture actually depicts the fairest 2 Sudanese women who actually graduated from Kitchener School of Medicine in January 1952. The one in the top is Dr. Khalda Zahir, and the second one is Dr. Zarwi Vahan Serkisian, who is half Sudanese, half Armenian. And in the middle is the Dean of Medicine. I think that was, yes, Pat Summers. And this is a picture of one of their classmates, Dr. Abu Bakr al-Amin. Abu Bakr al-Amin used to be a very actually close friend of our family. He was actually classmates in primary education with my late uncle, Rahmi, who was a lawyer actually. This is the other patch. And here is Dr. Sheikh Abdurrahman, the first actually Sudanese radiotherapist/oncologist. Part 7 covers the sort of education and training of doctors as well as allied healthcare professionals. And this is very much actually, began as early as the creation of the Kitchener School of Medicine, when the post of what is known as senior physician and senior surgeons was created in order to support the teaching in the medical school. And from this actually came so many sort of tributaries, and many British actually doctors were allowed actually to be trained as well as to go on leaves in order to obtain actually a higher diploma. And then when the Sudanese doctors started to come actually to the fore, the Sudanese doctors began to go to actually UK to be actually trained there. The first Sudanese doctors to be trained actually in Hammersmith was Dr. Ali Badri, and then Professor Mansour Ali Hasib followed suit, and then following that Dr. Abdul Halim Muhammad, and then Dr. Abdul Hamid Bayoumi actually, were trained, just to mention very few. So the training, as I mentioned, was not actually very much restricted to the physicians, because concomitant and actually an aligned sort of training of other healthcare professionals, including nurses training. The first nursing training school was established after the Omdurman Midwifery Training School in Omdurman again in 1925. The Midwifery Training School was established in February 1921, and there were another very landmark enterprise of training actually allied healthcare professionals, what is known as the assistant medical officers. And I remember actually, a lot of writings of the British doctors as well as people from the medical profession who visited Sudan as a sort of, to look into various services. They were very impressed by the level as well as the training of these assistant medical doctors, because they helped actually to expand the service into the periphery as well as in the rural areas. And the assistant medical officers actually took sort of several sort of pathways, and then training of other healthcare professionals like public health officers took place. And all this has been very much actually intermingled with the first medical school, Kitchener School of Medicine, and even, establishment of School of Public Health was actually established in 1935, and that was in close actually connections with similar institutions. And even, simple public health workers has been very much actually well trained in order to improve the service. And of course, other areas like, laboratory assistant as well as dispensers, there were establishment for these actually sort of personnel, likewise radiographers as well as hospital orderlies. So this is all covered actually in part 7, and also part 7 covers the evolution of the midwifery training school till the independence of the Sudan. So I think I will just go quickly over this part, and would like just to point to this very interesting actually sort of footage. This sorry about that. This sort of picture, this is Sayyida Jindiya Salah, Mrs. Jindiya Salah, who was one of the first actually teachers in the Omdurman Midwifery Training School. She was very bright, and she was actually very much actually credited by so many contributions till her demise in the mid-30s. This, the bottom picture, showed some workers actually for the public health work. This is their cars. This photograph was actually taken in the late 1940s. And you could see, part 8 covers, as I mentioned, the actually input of the Christian medical, Christian missionary societies in the health actually service. And it covers the contribution of the various actually societies, including the Church Missionary Society, which is, it is an actually English sort of society. And these actually societies had quite excellent contribution into the modern health service as well as education. One of the landmark actually hospitals, which was a famous hospital in Durman, was the Church Missionary Society Hospital, used to be known as Mustashfa al-Irsaliyya al-Ingiliziyya, and that actually made quite actually an excellent contribution to the health services. And it was linked actually with some satellite actually dispensaries. One of them was in Abu Rof, and others were actually in other sort of parts. This picture of the famous Daniel Comboni, who was credited actually with some contribution to modern education, and a chain of schools called Comboni schools actually were very renowned for educating so many Sudanese, not only Christian, but of all sort of. This picture was taken in the 1930s for one of the wards actually of the Church Missionary Society Hospital in Umdurman. And you could see, as a matter of interest, my eldest brother actually, Yahya, was born in this hospital in 1956. I didn't have that privilege. You could see this is some of the Sudanese staff, and this is one of the British doctors who was actually helping out in the service. And of course, the medical mission actually did not exempt any parts of the Sudan, and it involves actually certain areas where the Christian missionary enterprise has been very ripe, like the Nuba Mountain and like the Southern Sudan. And of course, just to mention that in Southern Sudan, the main actually provider for health and education during the last 4 decades of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan actually were the church, were the Christian missionary societies. I think Charlotte Martin had some interest in the sort of that sort of area. We have a chat about that. It will be interesting to know about it. Actually, an unfinished sort of project was actually writing about the role of the Christian mission in health, primarily in a separate actually volume, which will come soon. And that has actually other sort of small sections dealing with their role, because it was not only restricted to health and education, they were actually involved in other enterprises like linguistics, like studies in anthropology, like geographical actually discoveries, and you name but a few. So this part covered their role, and part 9 covered the actually footage of the early medical research, and then the creation of the first Ministry of Health. As a matter of interest, Ministry of Health was one of the first actually ministries to be created in the history of Sudan, and that followed actually a very famous political initiative by the British to get the Sudanese to try to actually govern themselves. When the legislative actually assembly was established in 1947, and 1948, the Ministry of Health was established, as well as the Ministry of Education. And as I mentioned earlier, as well as Professor Woodward mentioned, Dr. Ali Badri was the first actually Minister of Health in the Sudan, and Dr. Abdurrahman Ali, Sayyid Abdurrahman Ali Taha was the first one. So this part also covers some aspects of early beginning of research, as well as the, I think I was a bit discordant here. And then also there is a part covering the STAC Medical Research Laboratory, and then the creation of the Ministry of Health in 1948. And then by the time the British actually, left Sudan and Sudan took its independence, there were around actually 59 hospitals and around 470 dispensaries, as well as health center distributed all over Sudan. So part of that section is the history of the creation of the Sudan Defense Force and the establishment of the Sudan Medical Corps. And as a matter of interest, as I mentioned earlier, the core of the medical service was delivered by military doctors till the civilian medical department was established. And then the role of the actually military doctors became rather actually subsidiary following the First World War. However, the first actually medical corps was established following the famous 1924 actually incident when the some revolution uprising against the British took place, and then the Egyptian troops were expelled, and then Sudan actually armed force was established, and there was a necessity to establish actually a medical corps. However, this lasted only for around 7 years, and by the time of the famous actually economic recession that began in the world from 1928 till 1933, they disbanded completely actually the Sudan Medical Corps, which was linked with the Sudan Defense Force at that time, and the health services for the troops as well as their families being part of the civilian actually sort of service till the beginning of the Second World War, where there was a need actually to reestablish the sort of medical corps, but it was still actually did not take a sort of a separate or an individual. So it was still part of the civilian services. And the actual development of the Sudan Medical Corps only took part actually following the sad and tragic incidents of the situation in the South in 1955 in August, when some Southern troops actually mutinied, and that led to the beginning of the longest actually civil war in the Sudan. And this when actually the need to have a medical corps as part of the Sudan Defense Force, i.e. that was the old name for the Sudan Army, took place. And the first actually director who was actually, was appointed was Dr. Usman Yusuf Abu Akr, was the first actually sort of director of the Sudan Medical Corps. And then the Sudan Medical Corps, of course, progressed to be a quite actually different sort of separate establishment. So that this is covered in that part. Okay, so this picture here depicts, this picture was taken, sometime between 1905 to 1920 of the famous River Hospital. The River Hospital was the first military hospital that was established by the British on the actually on the relics as well as the remnants of the old Egyptian military hospital. It used to be called the River Hospital, was very famous, and it became later on the actually the building for the Sudan Ministry of Health. This is one of the buildings of the former Wellcome Tropical Research Laboratory. You could see how elegant it was taken. Part 10 actually covers the some aspects of epidemics as well as endemic diseases. And I conclude the second volume by writing an epilogue just giving a sort of a personal reflection of what happened to such wonderful actually medical enterprise in the Sudan, where actually this the remains of the excellent actually British medical the excellent medical service that was established by the British actually persisted for nearly 4 decades till the time when I graduated from medicine, and we benefited actually from such a strong foundation. However, in the last actually 2.5 decades, that wonderful actually health service crumbled completely. And now, of course, what has remained has been destroyed by the war. So that was just a sort of a personal reflection in the epilogue, the concluding sort of part of the book. There are some appendices, and I have actually destined the first 2 appendices to biographical notes of some of the medical doctors who have worked in Sudan, either Sudanese or British or others, and that covered both actually academic doctors as well as this is a photo of the late Professor Abdel Haim Bayoumi, who was the first actually Sudanese surgeon. This is a picture of Professor Bakhit Muhammad Umar, who was the first actually professor of surgery in the history of Sudan, the first Sudanese professor of surgery. He actually graduated from Edinburgh University. He did not actually graduate from Kitchener School of Medicine, and he was actually among the teaching staff of one of the leading Egyptian medical schools before actually he went back to Sudan and took the post of the first academic professor of surgery as Sudanese. So there are some notable doctors like Dr. Abdurrahman Atabani, who's actually a great uncle of Madame Iman Atabani, who was among our audience. And of course, Dr. Muhammad Hamas Sati, one of the eminent actually first researchers in medicine in Sudan. And there are pictures of so many doctors, like the first 2 women, Zarwi Vahan Serkisian, that was her name. Her sort of married name was Thuraya Muhammad Hassan. She was married to a very notable Sudanese sort of businessman. And I'm really indebted actually to her son by providing me with some actually aspects of her earlier life, as well as, and of course, many other characters like Sid Batul Muhammad Isa, as I mentioned in that sort of landmark photo, as well as Sid Jindiya Salah and Sid Hawal Basir, who was the first actually director of the nursing service in Sudan, and she actually got an MBE by the British King in 1951, before the late Elizabeth II was crowned. This is a photo of Dr. Zarwi Serkisian. This was taken around 1955. This is a photo of the first Sudanese ophthalmologist, Dr. Hussein Ahmed Hussein, who is the grandfather of Dr. Ibrahim Fahal and Professor Ahmed Fahal. And I'm really indebted for them to provide me with this photo. And of course, the Appendix 3 covers the living memories of Sudan Medical Service, 2 people whom I have been blessed actually to interview, as well as have some connections before their demise, is what I mentioned earlier, Dr. Kenneth Owen, who was one of the pioneers of renal transplantation, and of course, a very eminent actually physician who was one of the first senior physicians in the Sudan, and he was actually a lecturer of medicine in Kitchener, was Dr. Roy Mervyn Humphreys. Again, I was blessed actually to meet his son as well as his granddaughter, and I had a sort of quite interesting sort of encounter with him about one of the relics of Darfur Sultanate. It was the sword of Sultan Ibrahim Garad. For those who are interested, I have written a sort of an article about this in one of the American sort of historical Sudanese bulletins. And of course, there is some mention about the veteran of the Sudan Health Service, Dr. Hassan Afendi Zaki, who actually survived 3 different eras. And I concluded the book actually by talking about an aspect of the relationship between the British medical establishment and the Sudanese medical establishment, where I myself has been actually very much part of this. So it was about contemporary links between the British doctors as well as the Sudanese doctors. And I actually written about 4 aspects. The first aspect was the sort of very fascinating sort of enterprise, which was actually masterminded between the late Professor Ahmed Abdelaziz Yaqub and an eminent Irish surgeon, Jim McGowan, where they set between them a training scheme actually, and the vision as well as the dream of Ahmed Abdelaziz, who was actually a very eminent man in all aspects, was to train a surgeon for every hospital in Sudan, not only in general surgery, but even he actually touched on specialist surgical subspecialties like urology, like gastroenterology, and scores and scores actually of doctors were actually trained by Ahmed Abdelaziz, over 50. The second sort of enterprise was a similar one, but it was in internal medicine, and it was actually masterminded between the late Dr. Mohammed Hassan al-Taib and Dr. Brian Stack, who is a Scottish physician. And again, the vision was to train actually internist for the Sudan. The third aspect was a very landmark contribution to actually diabetic foot surfaces, which I personally been part of it, where the sort of scheme of training as well as establishing modern foot care in Sudan was actually conducted by 2 people, Rashid Abdullah and Alicia Foster. Ali Foster was actually a pioneer as well as an icon of podiatry, modern foot care in Britain. And our colleague and friend, Dr. Sharaf Ibrahim, probably knows this lady quite well from the time he spent in southern London. The last part was the contribution of a single person, Professor Peter Newman, who's professor of neurology, an eminent neurologist who now retired, into the medical training in Africa as well as in Sudan. He has a special passion in Sudan, and he used to travel in days gone by to Sudan as an examiner, and he supported actually the Sudanese physician. This is just a sort of a general list which I collated about the doctors who were actually trained by Mr. Ahmed Abdelaziz. You could actually see and read about many names whom you know, whether they were your mentors or your colleagues, as well as some list of those trained by Dr. Mohammed Hassan al-Taib. This is a picture of the late Professor Ahmed Abdelaziz. I would like to thank his daughter, Sarah, who put me in touch actually with Jim McGowan. This is a photo of our late mentor, Professor Mohammed Hassan al-Taib, who sadly actually passed away over a decade ago. This is just a sort of a how the training was actually conducted. I'm indebted to Professor Al-Fadil Al-Malik for giving me the training offer. Actually, later he was actually given by Professor Jim McGowan in Dublin. I just conclude by just pointing the excellent relationship between the British doctors and the Sudanese doctors. This photo actually is very close to my heart, because 2 of the surgical actually trainees featured in this, Dr. Usama Murtada, an eminent plastic surgeon in Sudan, and Dr. Jamal Shallali, who is another surgeon. Both are my classmates. This is the late Professor Ahmed Abdulaziz, and this is late Professor Omar Bilal, who was the first Sudanese urologist. This is Professor Nasruddin Ahmed, who was an icon actually of medical education. And all these people actually, the three of them passed away. And this is Professor Muhammad Ahmed Hassan Abdel Jalil, another very eminent actually surgeon, and we asked God to actually extend his life. He was one of our mentors. This is a British external examiner who came actually to examine the candidates of the surgical specialty exam, where two of my colleagues actually were the only successful. I think I will stop here and welcome any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for coming.